Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us in our first webinar of this year. My name is Rebecca Vicens, Strategic Initiatives Director of Filantropía Puerto Rico. As many of you know, we look to amplify the voice and impact of philanthropy in areas of equity, collaboration, transparency, and social justice. Before starting the webinar, I am presenting to you Millo Huertas Hernandez from Cooperativa Brújulas for them to walk us through the process of interpretation for this webinar that will be offered in Spanish with English interpretation. The following instructions will be done in Spanish and English.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Rebeca. Y antes de la introducción queremos asegurar que su función de interpretación esté funcionando. Before the introduction, we want to make sure that your interpretation function is working. So, para esto, por favor, apriete el botón en forma de globo en la parte de abajo de esta pantalla o de su pantalla, seleccione español y manténgala encendida durante todo el evento. So to do that, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and it has a shape of a globe. And select English and keep it on for the rest of the event. Si está conectado desde su teléfono, if you are using your phone, en la parte baja derecha de su pantalla, apriete los tres puntitos. Click on the three dots at the bottom right of your screen. Luego escoja la opción de interpretación de idioma. Now click on language interpretation. Y luego apriete español. And then choose English. Para finalizar, apriete listo. And finally, click on done. Al hacer esto, se supone que estén escuchando la voz de mi colega Bruje Fuego. You should be listening now to my colleague Bruje Fuego doing a sound check. And now I'm going to continue in Spanish.
So, hi once again. It's an honor to be with you all. My name is Millo Huertas Hernandez. My pronouns are they, them. I'm with my colleague Bruje Fuego. Their pronouns are also they, them. We give thanks to the land we're in, of Taíno and African peoples in Boriquén, Puerto Rico. We're here as part of Cooperativa Brújulas, working with the Language and Healing Justice Framework. This is the human right to interrupt and ensure that no language is dominant over another language, and that each person has the right to speak, listen, and be understood in the language that flows best from their heart. In Cooperativa Brújulas, we recognize that language throughout the world has been used as a tool by the state to exclude, control, dehumanize, also to colonize, imprison, and to exploit. Therefore, we work language justice as a crucial practice, political idea, and crucial vision to decolonize, heal, and carry out our power and participation in justice and liberation. So we're done with these instructions, and now we'll pass it on to Rebecca to continue. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Millo. So to tell you more about this webinar, today we start a series that is intended to inform our audience, in particular our members and donors, about the impact of the funds that we have granted to this day from the Adelante Fund, or Forward Fund in English. The Forward Fund is a collaborative fund that we launched in Filantropía PR 4 years ago after Hurricane Maria to support the recovery efforts. In this first session of the webinar series, who are joining us are Dr. María Enchautegui Román and Brayan Rosa Rodríguez from the Youth Development Institute. They will be presenting an agenda of the actions that the new administration should take during its first 100 days to reduce Puerto Rico's child poverty rate by 50% during the next 10 years. Dr. María is the Director of Research and Policy at Institute for Youth Development, served as an interim dean of the Economics Department of the University of Puerto Rico's Rio Piedras campus, and was a researcher at the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., and holds a PhD in economics from Florida State University. Brayan Rosa Rodríguez is the policy manager of Institute for Youth Development, worked as a supervisor at Columbia University's Tutoring Learning Center, and holds a master's degree in public administration and policy from New York University. Before starting and passing the microphone to them, I want to invite anyone who still has not registered in our list of electrical mailings so that you do. We are sharing the link to register on the chat so that you don't miss out on our events. Among these events is the one coming up next Thursday. We will be presenting another webinar of the series of the Adelanto Fund. With Isel Maces of Sembrando Sentido, she will be presenting to us the digital platform called Contratos en Ley, or Contracts by the Book in English, that is useful to monitor the practices and funds of public contracting. So if you still have not signed on to our list, do it now. So about our webinar this afternoon, this will last 30 minutes. María and Brayan will be presenting during this time. And at the end, we will have 15 minutes of questions and answers from you, the audience. If you have any questions during the process of the presentation, please be typing them through the function of Q&A and button that is on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're also live in Facebook, and you can also upload your questions there, and we'll be addressing them. So with that, I will now leave you with María and Brayan. All yours. Thank you. Oh no, that is not what I was going to put. Here's the correct one. Maria, you're on mute. Hi, good afternoon. We give thanks to Philanthropia for the opportunity to be able to address to you, especially us from the Youth Development Institute, and we really are grateful all the support and all the work that for the work that we've been doing in the last few years. The Youth Development Institute is the only organism that is committed solely, exclusively to promote research and public policies aimed at strengthening the economic security of families with children and youth. And we also do a lot of work of advocacy and mobilization so that these public policy and all these ideas, and we also call the community so that these public policies are implemented. Our goals are that every child in Puerto Rico have the opportunities that allow them to escape and get out of poverty and live in homes with economic security. What we'll be doing today, I'm having a technical difficulty. The faces are covering my text. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be presenting the findings of the different studies and research that we've been doing with the Institute, specifically about child poverty in Puerto Rico. We'll be covering the roadmap of what is poverty and child poverty in Puerto Rico, and we'll be doing an overall view of the plan for 100 days, and that we're presenting it to the new administration, specifically to Bill Roos's administration. Here I'm presenting the 3 work of publications that I've done. The first one, A Future of Child Poverty in Puerto Rico, how much it costs and what we can do about it. This work, we really want to set the foundation about child poverty as an economic problem of Puerto Rico, a problem that places Puerto Rico with a lot of precarious conditions and its future generations. The effects of COVID-19 on the economic security of families and children in Puerto Rico, vulnerabilities and projections and recommendations. This research and this publication we did a few months after the pandemic of COVID started, because we really wanted to look at how these families and the families that live in poverty, how the pandemic has been impacting and affecting the families. This research and publication was published in June of 2020. That time we thought maybe the pandemic was going to last maybe 4 to 6 months, but a year later we're still here. And the last piece that we're going to present is actually the 100-day plan, the agenda to reduce child poverty by encouraging economic mobility in Puerto Rico. This is another example of the work that we do where we really try to work closely with legislators and the people with public policy to really create an agenda to reduce child poverty. We think that child poverty has a very horrible repercussions in children, not only in children, but overall in Puerto Rico. This framework and this focus will present it in this way. We'll begin addressing as children, when children are from 0 to 17 years, what it is that we see, what do we find? We see how child poverty impacts children during their phases of development from 0 to 17, specifically from 0 to 4. We know that the effects and impacts on developments can be very negative. Specifically, we see high school dropout, low academic achievement and performance, and very little to no college. Children who also grow in poverty go to poor quality schools. Children also are more exposed to crime and violence. They're more victims of violence and also be involved in crime. These children also have more delicate health issues such as asthma, cognitive disabilities, obesity, and food insecurity. These children are also exposed to what has been called in literature to toxic stress. This is a stress that impacts the neurological development of children and that can have long-term consequences. A big piece of this research that has been done in this panel of what we've done, and there's a large number of findings that we can be actually doing on this piece of the impacts. But we also want to take it on and discuss of what happens with these children who grow in child poverty become adults. Because these children eventually will become adults. And so what do we find? What are the results and the consequences? Most likely, children have lower earnings, higher unemployment. The results of their health is poor. There's more victimization and criminal activities. And we can leave it at that, and we can keep this in a very private, individualized setting, each in their own respective settings. But these are also situations that impact the country. So what is this impact as a country? Well, there is less prosperity, lower quality of life, lower output, lower productivity. So child poverty, ever since we start in the phase of being children, has very important repercussions to Puerto Rico. And so this is why we offer why there is high consequences to the economic future of Puerto Rico. In our findings, we have moved to the task of actually looking at what it costs. What are the costs of child poverty in Puerto Rico? And so we've done definitely the studies of how adults end up having very low earnings. And we are talking about millions or billions when we say it in English. We have definitely, in terms of health cost, we have 1,003,076,000, which are higher rates to the rates of impacts on children. In terms of crime, we definitely see over 1,072,000 billions of dollars. per capita cost per child that we see, it's $11,536,000 that cost in Puerto Rico. And this cost is a yearly. This is a 4.3% of the production, national production of the GDP of Puerto Rico. We may think that 4.3% is not very much, but imagine if Puerto Rico is growing annually in the next 10 years, our economic perspectives would actually be very different. This is a per capita cost, almost $12,000. This, we could say, a cost. These are estimates. These are very conservative costs, and we only concentrate on the findings of earnings, health, and crime. Other folks or other research can actually add other elements to this cost. In our studies and our findings that we did with the impacts of COVID, we did some numeric research of how COVID immediately after the pandemic started, how this could actually impact the poverty rates. And we calculated that given the loss of income, the loss of employment, that COVID could actually increase the poverty rates of children of actually 58% to 65%. And it could actually take 44% to 52%. So COVID, given the estimate of the loss of employment and unemployment, it could actually take thousands of people to poverty. We actually simulated the impact of aid if people could have aid in the poverty in families with children. Those could be unemployment checks, the different funds and aids to families with children, and other funds. And we know that if with all the aid and with the COVID, could reduce poverty to almost half. But we made the alert and actually said that only this reduction would happen with the aid if it only would actually arrive to the families. But if it will take a long time to arrive to the families with children, they would be in very precarious conditions in terms of food insecurity, housing, and given that all the aid to Puerto Rico arrived to Puerto Rico after a very long time, many of these families suffered many poverty challenges. But we also recognize in the aid of COVID, they did have an impact in poverty, and we concentrated ourselves how actually at that time what we could do so that the aids could actually arrive to the families in a much quicker way. So one aid that actually never arrived to Puerto Rico, for example, was a pandemic EBT. And we were waiting for the pandemic since March for the children who were in school before in March, and now they were at schools, that they were having these aids when they were in school, and now they weren't having this. This aid was not available for children when the children were at school until it was after September, or actually is after very late in 2020 when the aids arrived. So the consequences of the economic security and the food security were very much impacted of the families. We know that children who live in levels of poverty is 57%, and that this hasn't changed. And this has not changed since the early 2000s. We know that at least one child of Puerto Rico is living under the poverty level established by the Puerto Rican government. We know that in the studies of how much this is costing Puerto Rico, in terms of the productivity, in terms of the GDP of Puerto Rico, in terms of the human potential that is totally misused given of the child poverty. And we're also promoting an agenda, a public policy agenda that reduces child poverty, which entails a significant investment. But we definitely say that even though the economic that there's a cost of poverty, it acts actually more costly not to do something about it. And it also, there is a big stress on families without employment. And what we see in COVID, and what we saw also during the Hurricane Maria and during the earthquakes, the most palpable vulnerability with families and children is the poverty. Brian, would you continue here? Thank you so much, Maria, for that presentation. Like Maria was saying, the situation in Puerto Rico is very precarious. And in the studies and the investigations, we also did an analysis where we actually saw that there's an actual possible roadmap to reduce poverty in half within 10 years. And that these public policies that we have in this research, in our roadmap, are policies that actually will maximize and increase the economic level of the country, recognizing that this framework and this topic of child poverty is very important. So therefore, we propose public policies that will actually support the work, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and Federal Child Tax Credit, and also create a universal transfer program. We also propose policies that definitely will create jobs and give aid to employers, and definitely give job creation credits for vulnerable population. It will definitely remove employment barriers, specifically extended hours programs, early educational programs, and also skills development, where sectorial job training, and to increase the rates of high school graduation and associate degrees. Our roadmap definitely includes and recognizes this. Now, what we want to present is what is the work that we've done for the 100-day plan that we're proposing here. And Maria can help me with the next slide. Thank you, Maria. We're doing this live. So our plan for 100 days, it's a comprehensive plan. We're basically, what we're working, it's an infrastructure. And we definitely carry out the 10 politics that are covered in our 100-day plan. And so this plan definitely moves forward these politics according to our analysis, and in really looking at significantly reduce child poverty in terms of 3, 5 to 10 years. It includes recommendations on communications, public policy alignments, policies at the federal level, and specifically actions such as executive orders and the creation of commissions, among others. And all these actions that actually, can be included, again, throughout executive orders and the creations of commissions, among others. We also want to clarify that these plans and these actions are not concretely all the policies that we include in the studies, but definitely include these policies that we include here in the first 100 days to reduce child poverty. It definitely takes into consideration the account and the language of public policy of the current administration, the context of the relationship between the executive and the legislature, and also it takes into consideration in the account of the composition of government instructions at the federal level. So the Institute has definitely given its task to identify the problem about child poverty in Puerto Rico, not only contextualized with the pandemic and how those numbers look, but definitely an exercise of a political analysis and public policy that we can give to the government. A plan, a very simple plan for the first 100 days. And let's get to meet this plan. What is it? First, knowing it has a vision to prepare the foundation and infrastructure to reduce child poverty in Puerto Rico by half in the next 10 years. This is possible. We've done it in the simulations that we've taken into consideration. And we believe that the plan will create this foundation. The objective is to accelerate the economic development of Puerto Rico through an agenda to reduce specifically child poverty. And like in the institutes, we did this work with language and public policy. We actually create 4 areas for this framework that are common for the people who work in government. For example, in the areas of communications, public policy actions, resource alignment and optimization, and federal level. So we've done a whole exercise and analysis of being able to really look at and explore all the different languages that are important and to be able to translate this language to the language that the working agencies are actually using. So the first area that we'll be looking at is the communication of the commitment. It is important that the governor and all the specific government agencies actually can communicate with the administration to actually say that they will reduce child poverty. So this has to be prioritized. So this is the opportunity that the government has, not only to give it into its message of the state and its social media, but actually giving it to its, talking about it with its entrusted personnel and its heads of agencies to be able to communicate the commitment to combat child poverty and to really be able to communicate the strategy to reduce child poverty. The next area it's an area that's a little bit more complete. We can, if you, Maria can help me with the next slide. It's area 2. Don't be concerned. Don't be freaked out. You can you'll have this, and when you'll be able to analyze and look at this presentation when you have all your time. But we want to present to you is basically it has 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. What are the different things that we can do in the first 100 days? Maria, we're going to look at some of the examples on this area of public policy actions through an executive order. I don't know what's going on. It's not moving to the next slide. Don't worry, Maria, we're live. I can carry with my computer. Now it moved. Don't everyone go. No one leaves. So the example 1, for example, of all the actions that you saw in the prior slide, this example number 1 talks about establishing a goal to reduce child poverty in 3, 5, and 10 years. This is an example that I bring. It's not only an example that Puerto Rico wants to bring. There's a whole movement at a federal level of organizations that push forward this goal, this target. The U.S. established itself a goal to reduce child poverty throughout the U.S. And it's a federal, but it's also different state. Like, for example, in California, there's legislation and it's been approved to reduce child poverty in 20 years, in half. So in every state has been moving to be able to develop public policy to be able to achieve this. And also, for example, the state of New York, it passed in this last legislative session, it proposed a project to have a goal to reduce child poverty. In the example, at the worldwide, New Zealand, New England, and in all the SPGs of how we can see to eradicate child poverty. So there's a consensus not only in the scientific community, but in the not only in the advocacy world, not only of the public policy people in communities, but in the whole world, that we understand the importance of reducing child poverty. What's missing here is actions and a plan of action. We all agree that this is a good idea. So the next example is an example of being able to remove barriers for employment to families with children. This is an actions that executives can do. For example, presenting a report on the current status of the preschool development grant birth through 5 years. It is important, all these federal grants that Puerto Rico receive, and maximize this so that we can actually be able to have a strategic plan that really removes barriers for employment to families with children, to be able to eliminate and reduce child poverty. Also, identify changes in regulations and funding requirements to increase the number of child care vouchers available to working families. And it's important that families who want to work and families who are working are able to make sure that their children are well taken care of in a program of child care where they have the peace of mind that their children are safe and they can go to work, or be able to take a larger amount and schedule of their work. It is also very important that Puerto Rico conduct a financial and legal analysis to determine the feasibility of braiding funding initiatives among child care programs, such as federal, public, and private, and that they be able to achieve a more comprehensive strategies, and that no one stays out of the requirements because of X and Y requirements. These are examples of what can be done in the first 100 days of the administration. Another third example is develop a strategy for sectorial labor development, to be able to gather, for example, information on the current status of workforce training programs. This is very important where we're at. And if we're thinking about opening employment, about opening schools, and be actually invest in Puerto Rico, people being able to work. And these programs have to be catered to different sectors that are bringing in funds to Puerto Rico. It's also important to develop agreements of understandings, MOU, between the Workforce Innovative and Opportunity Act and the different agencies that actually develop these workforces. It's important that these agreements are being shared amongst agencies, and to share data and trends in employment by industrial sectors and regions. And it's important to publish the quarterly results of current job development programs, and not only to see what strategies work or not amongst the scientific communities, but that the government is able to see how the public investment actually is creating more jobs and better services for our people, so that this can actually move to a better plan of funding. We're not asking for the moon to be brought down to us, but actually to do actions amongst the actual possibilities of what the government can see. So we move to the third area, resource alignment and optimization. There's actually 1, 2, and 3 points here. Create an advisory commission on poverty, attached to Fortaleza with a focus on child poverty and its social and economic implications that the government of Puerto Rico promises, and that it's in the first 100 days. It is also important to actually create a council and working group to work on the matter in an interagency manner and designate a contact person for each agency, and that the government identify special working groups or task forces that have been active during the 2016-2020 period focused on children and youth programs to guarantee continuity. And we want to make sure that the statistics and research is actually done based on what actually people know, for all of us who work in these communities. Lastly, to not overwhelm you with so much information, the last aspect of the plan is the fourth area of federal level. This is a great area that we have, that Puerto Rico can have as priorities. First, as it is time where it's time to extend the child tax credit for Puerto Rico. It's time for people to be able to have a reimbursement of up to $2,000 per child if they're working. So at a federal level, this is a priority. We also want to have a food security program through the nutritional assistance program that is financed with adequate levels. And we also want to have an equity in child care funds so that every child in Puerto Rico has a good development program. We want to have additional grants. We also want to make sure that Puerto Rico is included in the programs and strategies of evaluation. And we want to make sure that Puerto Rico is included in strategies to combat child poverty in Puerto Rico. And we want to make sure that in Washington, that our local government in Washington, we're able to be part of issues and conversations of energy and other issues of daily business are taken care of, but also the child poverty are taken care of also in Puerto Rico. And before going to the next slide is one of the questions is, well, Brian, there's 30 days. What of the first 100 days? What's going on? What has happened? We haven't lost our window of opportunity. It is important to make sure that the governor is definitely talking about the vaccinations and of reopening the schools and the crisis of the violence of gender, emergency of gender violence in the country. But that they're also, in our studies, the vulnerability and that palpable crises that are happening in Puerto Rico in the last 20 years is the child poverty in Puerto Rico. So it is very important that child poverty is looked at as a crisis. And we don't want to continue looking and seeing at how money is lost in Puerto Rico. But we want to see the development, the social development, and how the child poverty has created. These are numbers that sometimes these are what looks like. If you look at your different at your screen, how our politics and our plan can actually reduce poverty between 3, 5, and 10 years. The extreme poverty reduces significantly with the proposals that we have. But you may add, but this costs money. Well, you can see in the panel, in the bars here, this is the cost of poverty, and the red or the magenta, and the cost of public policy is the blue. In all the cases, it costs more to leave the way things are than to invest in public policies that will definitely reduce child poverty. So the argument is complete in any way you look at it. And if you don't like numbers and you're like, you can't deal with numbers, these are other arguments. How does Puerto Rico look with 50% less of child poverty? How? Because we'll do it because Puerto Rico will definitely be more competitive. It's definitely a Puerto Rico that will be with more competitive economy, less immigration. It's a healthier Puerto Rico, less asthma, less diabetes, less mental illness. It's a safer Puerto Rico, less violence, where there's less crime, where there's actually better quality of life. So it's very important that if we want to have a better Puerto Rico, we want to make sure that we decrease child poverty. This is something we can do now, that children may be able to envision a better future in Puerto Rico. They can open their eyes to a promise, to a responsibility that we all have in being able to have a Puerto Rico a country where they can actually grow, go to school, and stay here. So how can we contribute to this goal? Well, how we can contribute, do three things. One, educate yourself. Here, we have our web pages where you can actually go to these web pages and you can actually go to LinkedIn and you can find out about our work. You can also mobilize and you can actually say what you can find out more about our information. I also invite you our voting guide, and that actually begins with what each political party actually had in their position on being able to reduce child poverty and being able to maintain that in downtown. And I also invite you when you can help the institute. If you have a talent, if you have a skill, we invite you to write to us, so you can actually write to us to the different information that we have here. You can email us at info@juventudpr.org. This is very important that we do this work. We can't wait no more. We urge you that with this urgency, we move on these goals. So now we'll move to Q&A that I'm sure there's many.
Rebecca, I think you're on mute. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that. I'm so pumped up. I am so pumped up, and that's what I've been saying. Thanks for the tremendous presentation, so accurate, and I already feel motivated. I believe the presentation has been very good. I saw that there is a question here in the chat when you were talking about advice and counsel and commission. Someone asked if it exists or a governor's multi-sectoral council for early childhood that used to exist, and they are asking if you will recommend to activate that council back again. Look, I think the recommendations that we have in our 100-day plan is being able to align and optimize resources. If there is already a job that was done through this multi-sectoral council in Puerto Rico, it is important that it's not dumped, not start from zero. It is important that continuity is given to jobs. For the past 20 years, we've had 20 different governments and 20 different plans. It is important that a single plan is made consistent with the goal of reducing child poverty. If there is something in that plan, that in that work group worth rescuing, it is important to highlight it so we can get continuity. We are losing our country and it's getting lost in the conversation starting from scratch. All right, thank you. I invite the audience to continue sending your questions. Right now, I don't have any more in the chat nor in the Q&A setting, but you are invited to send them. I do have one. I wonder if you, apart from the work of public policy, if you're doing some effort to also mobilize people toward this purpose, to be doing parallel work. Yes, we do, and part of the Institute does is work with the community. We distinguish ourselves a little from other groups in which we try to include the community in the research and obviously also in the process of mobilization. So we have been doing that. For example, before the elections, we had a debate where we managed to have a debate with the candidates who were running to become governors, solely dedicated in the issue of child poverty. Where young people and mothers of different communities participate and ask direct questions. So that's a very part of our DNA, and we want to continue maintaining that. And we have our goal, as everything is now remote due to the pandemic. This hinders the work is done traditionally of going and visiting and doing educational meetings and so on.
but we can do mobilization through our social networks. I invite you to be part of our social networks, that you continue to educate yourself, and that you can sign up. You can put your information in cuantonoscuesta.com, and we receive that information and we can mobilize ourselves. We have our plans. I'm going to dare to say it, Maria. I'm going to say it. We have our plan to do an advocacy day sometimes during this semester. So I invite you to join our list of contacts, and you may be up to date on how you can join and participate, not only individually, but if you represent a community group who would like to join in the issue of child poverty as a priority issue in your advocacy work, we can sit and talk and conspire together about this work. Perfect. I see that there is some questions have arrived here. They ask if they're going to receive the presentations. Yeah, we're going to share it with the whole audience. After we finish the webinar, we will send the recording and the presentation. The next question is if there is any merchandise to support and to support you all and spread the word. I think you've been answering that more or less, but well, the last thing is we put our contacts in social network. We are quite active in Facebook and Twitter, so do shares in our post. We also have a newsletter that we send via email. You can always communicate directly with us to info@juventudpr.org. Very good. Another question is, have you met with the current legislators to communicate this plan? We have that on the agenda. We have that on the agenda, all these meetings. As you know, the 100-day plan is specifically focused on the work that can be done by the administration, starting from the executive head. So this is direct proposal to the governors and the governor's task force. But as you well know, we'll put it, it is important that legislators be part of these efforts, and we have quite a strong agenda of meeting this month and then next month to present to the legislator, a non-traditional legislator. So we have to have that consensus with all the political parties and all the groups represented there in the legislature. So we have that in our plans to do this work. Very good. We have another question about how this program gives education to parents. They comment that you can have all the resources, but if mom and dad are not financially educated, what is being done can be used. What do you all think? Well, part of our blueprint proposal is develop of workforce to be able to incorporate more fathers and mothers in the world of employment. And we recognize that many of these fathers and mothers have low levels of schooling, so we push for them to complete their high school diploma, short skill development training sessions, and also associate degrees in terms of other trainings, for example, financial matters. I believe that there is people already doing that. I do not want to underestimate the capacity of the mothers that I have interviewed and are able to make ends meet with $400 for a month or 30 days. I mean, I'm not really sure if I can give financial classes to these moms. So I do think that there is a thing that can be done, but we are not underestimating the capacity of many moms to recover their limited budget. Definitely. Another question is, how do you got to the recommendations for each area? How was this process? Well, I can tell you that we will need at least 2 more days. We will need a 2-day conference to tell you the whole story, but they were specific criteria that we used to include them in the roadmap sheet. For example, that there is a recommendation supported by scientific evidence, that there has been proven when the recommendation X happened, there is a Y effect most of the time in the population. Also, we take in consideration the cost of public policy, the impact it had on reducing child poverty rate, the impact of the number of people they could benefit from the program. So it was a combination of factors to determine which ones are we were going to be chasing. And there is also an aspect of social political of what is the situation we have now in the country. Of course, from our work, when they want to do something in the government, it gets done. Nobody asks where the money will coming out of. It just simply gets done. So our proposal is ambitious because we know that they can achieve that resources where resources are focused. Very good. There is a question. People with disability are at risk of being economically disadvantaged. Will it be limited to general population, or are you contemplating to include this population? I don't know if Maria wants to talk about how we use the data to calculate at least part of the costs and everything related to. Well, we haven't done a particular focus on people or children with disabilities. We know that the program of disability, especially cognitive, is highest among children living in poverty. What we want is that all children live in the best of their abilities. And if those capacities are in certain way more limited because they have some physical disability, but there is other things they can do. So what guides our approach is the way that child poverty limits the capacity of these children and the children with disabilities. They may have them, but they have another capacities. We want these children to live in their fullest. Here are questions similar to the ones you've answered. I will mention them in case you want to elaborate in any other way. What formula did you use to conclude that the roadmap and betting strategy will lead to child poverty reduction in 10 years? Well, there were estimates that we made. I'll give you the scientific answer and then I'll give you the cool answer, the one that I like to tell people. The scientific one is that we built a series of policies. We had a database that we used. The community service is census data that is taking in constructed, and we constructed variables that we allow us to see the impact from policies. If we increase the income of the family, it recalculates the poverty by how much it will increase or go down. And if there is a policy that increases the income in X quantities to the family, it will recalculate the poverty. And then I realize if it went up or if it went down by how much, depending on the impact of the policy. That's the simple answer. And we can go into a different, deeper conversation about that. But to review, in reality, how did we make the estimate? We took in consideration the annual impact that each policy has. We also took in consideration the potential policy that has in reducing child poverty in terms of extreme poverty, 100% poverty, poverty of 150%, and the number of people who will be impacted by the policy. So, taking into consideration all these factors, we added and estimate the impact, adjusting, of course, because the impact of the policy in year 0 will not be the same in the 10th year because they will work in the dynamic way. If there is a policy that increases employment, it will be more people who will be able to request more tax credit. So it is an equation that simulates and moves dynamically over the time, but they were estimates using the data of the database of census and the population estimate to 10 years in Puerto Rico. That's the simple answer. Very good. Here's an additional question. How can the organizations that we are doing the groundwork react to the consequences of poverty join the anti-poverty movement? There are a lot of questions that are aligned like this one. So I think they have inspired and many people is already working on this. And I think there is a presentation, this presentation has motivated that desire to mobilize. So yes, well, we're trying to impact and make change at the systemic level on public policies in Puerto Rico and also in programs and practices at the level of the agencies. So we urge you to be paying attention to the work that we do. We too pay a close attention to what other organizations do and look for what opportunities there are to work together. But we are focusing, and sometimes people find it a little bit complicated to understand. We do not provide service to the families. What we are looking for is to impact change at the public policy level, programs and practices at the government level. So to extend that, they have to, this organization have information on how these programs work, what policies you think could work for your family. All that information is valuable for all of us. So please contact us. We will love to hear from you. We want to hear what these organizations are doing, what their experience are, because that nourish our work. All right. We have one last question, and with that, we closed. We're told that yesterday the governor announced that the budget to be presented to the board included 5.5 million to fight child poverty. And what do you suggest that this money is invested in? Well, this we don't have the details of what it is the plan of the governor has with those 5.5 millions, but we understand that what we included in the 100-day plan, there are actions that won't cost any significant additional money. Here's an opportunity, and Maria, you hold me back if I am imagining an utopia in Puerto Rico because I'm like that. I already spent the money in my mind. I spend the money and I owe money already. But this 5.5 million, it can work a lot to be able to help remove barriers to employment, which is directing opportunity programs that can be done with that money. Also, we propose a public policy that has proven to be high impact, what is creating a direct transfer program to family where we can see the impact it has and the increase in that income from those home from a period of time. So those millions of dollars can be used to design some kind of pilot program. And I've already spent them, I don't know. And we're also proposing subsidized employment. Many of these family needs the first step into the labor market. Many of these mothers, especially, they don't have a lot of work experience. They have left the job market a long time ago, so they need a push and making that entrance into the working market. So that's why we're proposing subsidized employment, maybe like 2,000, for example. Exactly. Also, talking about tax credits, there is an issue of incentivizing small and medium businesses. We are going to be able to encourage that work. giving that credit to employers may employ people with specific characteristics found at the disadvantage when it comes to working or looking for work. That's something that it can be done. And I'm telling you, Rebecca, I already spent the money, and we need more. And for the record, that news broke here. I didn't know about that million to be assigned, but we're going to track down that money and let's see what is invested in, because a lot of things are advertised here and no one follows the tray and nobody knows what the results are. That kind of things, we're going to follow the trail to see how that money was really invested and what is the impact with that. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Maria, for the presentation, for motivating us. And I hope that from this webinar, new collaborations arise and we can keep mobilizing. Yes, I was writing down the different groups that I saw in the chat to do a follow-up conversation. Thank you. Well, to all our audience, thanks for being here. I remind you that you can check the recording of this webinar in both English and Spanish on our YouTube channel. I estimate that the next Monday will be most available, maybe earlier. We also have a Sembrando Sentido webinar next Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. And what else? Finally, we invite you to give us feedback on our webinar by clicking on the link we are sharing now, and it will take you less than 5 minutes, I promise, and it will help a lot to improve this initiative. So with that, I leave you, and again, thanking you for joining us and for supporting us, amplifying the voice, the impact of philanthropy in Puerto Rico. Thank you.